right, everyone, welcome back to 2325 Fitness. We're back again with Yunus Barisik. He was with us a few episodes ago talking about strength and conditioning, about hockey players, how he's brought a lot of average hockey players who are skinny fat to their utmost and top level. Today, we're going to be talking about injuries, and Yunus has a very different approach, a very different perspective on how to train through injuries, train around injuries at the same time when people, especially who are athletes, come back to play after a long break from injuries, they're still in their top form, if not even better than how they were before. So, before we get started, how's everything been with you? How's everything in Egypt, right?
Yeah, Egypt. Everything's great, man. Like people ask me, and they probably have a completely wrong idea about Egypt throughout what they see in the mainstream media. Because here we have great weather, great food, cost of living is low, pollution, no, we don't have that, and life is good.
That's awesome, man. And I mean, that is like probably one of the dreams that people have, is to be able to, I know you talk about this as well, to have the financial freedom and financial stability in a way that you are originally from somewhere, but you're able to like work and live in a place that's comfortable for you without having to worry about anything. So that's really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like
How's
to give you an idea, like Gold's Gym, the best gym in town, is 3 minutes by foot from my place. I can walk to the beach whenever I want. It's a little far off, but 20 minutes. So I pretty much got everything I need.
That's awesome. And I was born and raised in Abu Dhabi. So I've basically lived my entire life, 17 years of my life in the Middle East. So I know how convenient that is. I know how fortunate people who can live there, have a good earning, and basically decide to settle there are enjoying in terms of like health, fitness, and one of the biggest things is, I think you can tell this too because you're from Finland, which I would assume is a cold country, right? It's cold, freezing, right?
Yeah.
It's and the topic today is also injuries. I think one thing that I've realized, that when I was in Abu Dhabi, right, we used to play soccer on the street. I used to get hit, bruised every single time I'm there, on concrete, on cement road, right? But never have I had severe injuries. And that was because probably the food we ate, the weather, and stuff like that. As soon as I came to Canada, it started getting cold. I got my first ACL tear, and I was like shocked. I was like 17 years. I played in the most aggressive way possible without any coaching or anything. And I was so healthy and fit. Now I come to a place like Canada where there's no sun, it's cold and stuff like that. And boom, I'm injured. So how have you, like, moving from Finland to Egypt, seen maybe in yourself or even like people around you, that is that actually a factor, the place where you live and the food you eat?
I would imagine it plays a factor. I don't have any data or scientific studies to quote here, but one thing that is definitely interesting is that, if you live in a place where you don't have vitamin D through natural sunlight, and this is Finland, this is most of North America, people are going to be deficient in vitamin D, and there's research that shows that you're more prone to injury, sports injury. Especially sports hernia, who are people who are athletes who are deficient in vitamin D. This was on NFL or high-level football players. So there is some data to back it up. Obviously, probably not too much studies done in this area, but from a personal point of view, like you just said, I mean, the weather is great, and you played some aggressive street football over there, and you never got injuries. And then back in Canada, well, shit starts to happen. So
yeah. So I mean, and how has that affected your training? Like, let's say your healthy side, your health aspect, your mood, your training, your energy. Is that like coming from the gloomy side of the cold winters of Finland to a so basically?
Absolutely, and that's one of the main reasons I moved out of there. Before I came to Egypt, I lived in Turkey for a while. Before that, I stayed in Thailand, so I'm not completely new to it. But what I did back home for a few years is I would train my hockey players in the off season in the summer back home, and then as soon as off season was over, August, I jumped on the plane and flew over to Thailand and spent the winters there for 2 years. And that to me was a huge eye opener in that, I got in the best shape of my life. Probably the atmosphere had something to do with it. And also, it's just a different vibe when people are happy because they don't have to sit all day long inside like you do during winter in the north. And, it messes you up. Your mood goes down. You're depressed. You don't really want to go anywhere because it's raining. So that for me, for a long time, growing up, I always hated the winters, even though I love to play hockey outside. But other than that, I always wanted to escape that. And now I'm able to do that. And definitely how can it not affect your mood?
Of course. I totally understand that. I totally attest to that as well. Now, considering the mood and how fitness changes and health aspects come into it, what have you seen, especially with your personal experience, I would say, even here, even in Finland, like when you went through injuries, when you had some kind of a setback, how has that impacted you? And what has your personal experience been when working through injuries and being in the best shape ever?
Okay, so I'll give you some quick background information. About 10 years ago, I really got into lifting heavy stuff. I entertained thoughts of doing a powerlifting meet, like a small local one, because I'm not naturally good at it. So I would never be able to compete at a national level, but maybe, hey, let's do a small local one and see how I do. But my technique wasn't that good, especially in the bench press. So I injured my right shoulder. It wasn't a bad injury, but you could tell something was off. Anytime I tried to go heavy, there was a setback and I had to dial back. Then my right ankle is very locked up, so I don't have good mobility in that ankle, which prevents me from squatting deep. And back, like I said, 10 years ago, during that time, it was so bad that when I squatted to powerlifting depth, I started to get lower back issues. And obviously, the way to fix that is just to elevate your heels on a wedge or small plates, and then I can squat all the way down. And also, my deadlift technique wasn't that good. I was doing conventional, and I was trying to put too much weight on the bar too fast, which also gave me some lower back problems. And then I realized, like, health and longevity is more important to me than pushing for some arbitrary number, because I'm never gonna set a world record or anything like that. So there's really nothing on the line for me where it would make sense to try to risk anything. And that has pretty much been my guiding mindset for the last 10 plus years is, health, longevity, priority, and you have to earn your weight increases. And if you let your technique break down just to lift more weight, because now you're starting to risk it. And then the eventual outcome of that is you're going to sit on the shelf. And when you're injured, you're not going to make progress. So people have to understand that if I make small progress today while I'm healthy, I'll come back next week, make small progress again. And then you rack it up over 2, 5, 10, 20 years, and you'll have made a ton of progress.
Right. And that's definitely something.
Exactly. So, I have, like I said, fortunately, I haven't had any major injuries, but also I've been smart about my training. So I don't really think I'm going to run into problems in the future either, because I always have that mindset that, hey, I want to be doing this when I'm 65, 70. So there's no reason for me to push past my current ability.
It's very interesting you talk about that, because I know it's not the mainstream idea to work with injuries or work around injuries, but even recently, like professional athletes, for example, I was reading up, someone was telling me about, forgetting his name from NFL, Odell Beckham Jr., when he had a severe, I think an ACL or like a severe injury, within 3 to 4 months, they had him like starting to pivot, cut, and like do all those things, because usually they say that it's like a 6-month time period, right? But in a professional level, like I think it's okay for you to kind of like, and this is something you talk in your strength book as well, is that how people need to stop babying and stop like worrying about humans like they're really fragile, I would say, made out of fragile material, rather than treat them with the smart way, but also be strong about it, right? So what is something that you see, a mistake that you see a lot of regular physios and even athletes like try to do, especially in the early stages of an injury or rehab?
Okay. So I will start by saying that we don't usually give the human body the credit it deserves. So it's very, very resilient. So if you push it, usually it will come back strong, but you have to also be smart about it. So if you just had knee surgery 3 days ago, we're not going to throw 300 pounds on the bar and have you do back squats, right? So that would be completely stupid. But we also want you to progressively overload so that within 4 months or whatever the schedule is for you to come back, you will be able to squat 300 pounds again, full range of motion, no pain whatsoever. And like you just said, the biggest mistake is treating athletes and even regular people, but athletes especially, like as if they were made out of glass. So when I see these physical therapists, a lot of times it's just light dumbbell work, light resistance band stuff, Bosu ball stuff, balance stuff. Like, okay, you might have some of that in the early stages, depending on how severe the injury is. If let's say we're 3 months down the line and the guy is supposed to return to play in 2 weeks and you're still doing that, what's going to happen when he steps on the field? He's going to get crushed, Sure. And his performance is not going to be on the level that we want him, for him to be able to produce something on the scoreboard. That's the first thing. Second thing is, let's say we talk about American football or hockey or even soccer, which is pretty aggressive, and you have to be able to withstand some level of abuse. So if your body, your muscles, your joints, they're not prepared for that, what's going to happen? You run a higher risk of re-injury. And that's what happens a lot of times. Like, guys come back, not necessarily too early, but they come back and they re-injure themselves because they were not prepared to handle the physical abuse.
Sure. So what is let's say in your experience, right? I know you talk about a junior hockey player that you've had work with him. In your general experience, what's like an ideal time frame for someone to, let's say, an ACL injury, which is probably like the most common one of the major injuries, and then you have the ankle injuries or so on and so forth. What is like the time frame you say that someone can start like kind of loading up or like even like resemble the similar sport activities to get back into it?
Okay. So first thing I do is I either talk directly to the doctor who's handling it or the athlete who will be able to ask the doctor. And I ask the doctor, like, okay, when is the soonest we can start doing something physical? Like, we're not talking about we're gonna, like I said, squat 300 pounds yet, but when can we actually have a dumbbell in our hand, for example?
Right.
And they're gonna give me a timeline because I'm not an expert on that. So I have to respect that, and sure, I have to ask for their advice. But once they give me the green light, as simple as walking with a slide sled is better than riding the stationary bike, which is a lot of times what rehab includes for athletes. For example, I had one NHL prospect who had ACL surgery, and I think it was 10 or 14 days after the surgery, I got to go ahead that we can actually start walking with a sled. Whereas usually it would have been like 2 months down the road before we can start doing something. And I told the player, like, if we do that, you're not going to be ready for the season. So that's how we started. Like, first week, 45 pounds on the plate. We just walk like 100 meters, like 6 times. And then next day we do the same thing, but we walk backwards, different stimulus. Third day we do it sideways, lateral walks. And then we keep doing that 6 days out of the week. 2 weeks in, okay, now we can start doing something with a dumbbell. So it might be you just hold a dumbbell in your hand. We're doing Bulgarian split squats on the healthy side, and you hold on to the rack for stability, so we don't risk you twisting your knee again or something like that. Okay, so people have to get out of the mindset of, okay, if I cannot squat and deadlift heavy, I cannot do anything. So I just have to ride the bike and do some leg presses or leg curls, and that's all I can do for the next 3 months. Like there's always that you can do something, and week by week, little by little, we increase the intensity or the volume, and over time, we're gonna get you back to the previous level a lot faster than usual.
And I've seen that personally. Like, that's what always intrigued me is that with professional athletes, I've seen the way their rehab is done, versus especially on like a really high level, like the Premier League, for example, right? Like Virgil van Dijk, he had an ACL surgery recently, and he came back from an ACL injury, and I was seeing his rehab, and then I compared to like my own rehab or any like an average person's rehab. There's a lot more progression or a lot more quickness in the way those athletes are rehabbed versus an average person. And I was like, there's no way they're going to risk the athlete getting more injured. And I'm pretty sure the way they're doing it is because they know the body's able to kind of like get through that. Because you're saying sled walks in 2 weeks. I know personally from an ACL experience that how painful the first 2 weeks are. To do anything in from a mental perspective is just basically close to zero if I think about it.
Yeah. And to me, the litmus test is, can you walk to the grocery store and pick up some groceries? Like if you can do that, then we can have you do the sled work. And that's where we start.
So yeah, that's very interesting. And like the approach I think also factors in. It's like for an average person, physio is like, just a regular guy. He can play sports in like one whole year. He doesn't need to be quick. But for an athlete, they don't have a choice. They have to like kind of get them back. But that does give you the sense that, the human body, if need be, even in the early stages, could be pushed under some load and it will respond to really well. Of course, it depends person to person and the circumstances, but that's really, really intriguing to me. And that brings me to the question of like, maintaining your health and fitness during that aspect. I understand that especially as an athlete, it may be much more different, but for an average person, how can someone not lose their strength or get back to, like, let's say if it's a lower body injury, get back to upper body work, or if it's upper body injury, get back to lower body work? How does that factor in? And also with your calories, there's this, I don't know if it's a misconception or if it's actually true, but like you need to eat at least on your maintenance, if not more, for you to be able to recover quicker. So if you're trying to be in that deficit in sense of like, hey, I don't want to get any fat. How does that work? How do you kind of like find the fine line or the balance between that?
It's not really something I have experienced with my athletes because usually, well, we have already talked about their diets well in advance, so they know what they need to do and they're not gonna eat trash. And a big part of getting fat during rehab is, first of all, not starting early enough with physical activity. So there's a difference if you're 2 weeks out versus if you're 6 weeks out doing nothing, because those extra 4 weeks, well, sure, you're gonna get fatter from that because you're not doing anything. And the second thing is, if you just eat quality foods, most of the time hunger is a good sign in that way. Like if you're eating quality foods, it's really, really difficult to overeat. Whereas if you're just eating pizza and burgers and you're feeling down because you cannot practice your sport or whatever, because this is what happens to a lot of people who are going through rehab. So that's a really easy way to rack up too many calories and then you get fat. But like I said, if you just keep it relatively clean, your diet, you get back into physical activity as soon as possible, you move around, I don't really see an issue with that, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think it's funny you mentioned that because I've seen this personally with myself, is that I'm a very active person, or I was prior to my injury. I'm getting back into it now, but I kind of lost appetite for like about a week or so. Like I would have like light walking, light movement. I would actually force myself because I would get restless by just being on the couch, and like even if I'm icing it, there's no way around it. Then I would just get up and walk around, but I would not feel hungry. I would like force myself to eat, and in my head, I'm like, what do? I need to eat enough, but I can't even eat that much, and that's gonna probably slow my recovery process. So I kind of like, get my body to more like move around a little bit more, just so I have some hunger coming in, and so I could eat. So it's really interesting that you mentioned that, like quality food kind of helps you with that hunger. But at the same time, if you're just gonna eat junk, no matter how hungry you are, it's just gonna like load you up. Now, one thing, one thing I read in your book, and this is very interesting, and a lot of people probably don't know or don't talk about it, is how one side versus the other. We always have this notion that, you do the single leg work, single arm work, it's going to only affect your single arm. Your right bicep's going to get bigger, your right quad's going to get bigger. But you talk about the cross training effect, or cross training education is what you talk about in your
Cross
book.
education.
Cross
But
education, right?
it's also called cross training. It has a
Yeah,
few
yeah.
different things. Yeah.
Cross education, right? And the first time I heard about it was, you probably heard about the bodybuilder out in Dubai who tore his pec muscle, Ryan Crawley. You might have
I might have heard the name, but I didn't know about
he
him.
works out with Larry Wheels and like those big, really big guys, right? So I think it was like a few months ago he was doing a incline bench press, and he completely like tore off his pec muscle off the bone. It completely came off into his bicep, right? So he was completely injured, done. So when he came back, he couldn't move that at all, but he was working out his other side. And I was looking into it, I was reading up on that, and that's a stimulus that kind of develops. Like the more you work out your one side, because your other side's technically not working, it helps you grow. That's what my understanding of the cross education effect is. I wanted to hear from you, Yunus, like what it exactly is, how is it effective, and what have you seen in your athletes when you work with them with injuries?
Okay. So when I explain this concept, it's a relatively simple concept, but I want you to imagine that you broke your wrist, let's say playing sports. You can't touch a weight with your left hand. It's broken. Wrist is broken. But your right hand is healthy. So what are we going to do? We're going to curl. We're going to do triceps extension. We're going to do presses. We're going to do rows. We're going to do pulls on the healthy right side. And through that, the strength gains we make on that healthy right side, even though you don't touch any weight on the left side, your left side is going to retain the muscle mass, and you're even going to get stronger on the left side. So once that cast comes off, let's say 4 or 6 weeks from now, that left side is going to look the same. So it's not going to be smaller like usually happens because you lose muscle mass, and you'll be stronger on that side as well. Obviously, it's not a 100% transfer of the strength gains from the healthy side to the injured side, but you're going to retain some of those strength gains. And this is huge because, coming back to what we talked about before, rehab, usually what happens, guys lose muscle mass, they lose strength, they lose speed, they lose power. So by doing this type of rehab through the cross education effect, we're able to pretty much keep them at their pre-injury levels in all of those: muscle mass, strength, power, speed. And what's going to happen when they're returned to play? Well, the gap between where they were and where they are now is a lot smaller, and so they'll be able to play at a higher level and get there faster. And also, it shortens your recovery period, because, like we just talked about, when you throw something physical at the body that is still within its limits, even though it's out of its comfort zone for now, it's gonna recover faster because it has no other option. So this is example. I'll give you an example.
Sure.
I had an NHL prospect a few summers ago. He had shoulder surgery after the season, and I did everything we just talked about. And when he went to the NHL team's assessment after the rehab, they were amazed because they said, like, you cannot possibly be in this shape after so little time. They said, like, usually it takes an extra 2-4 weeks before guys get their full strength and range of motion back. And my player was saying, no, I'm fully good. Assess me. And they assessed him, and they were like, wow, you really are back to where we want you to be 2-4 weeks before you were scheduled. And my player even told them, hey, I could have jumped on the ice and played in a game 2 weeks ago already. Like, I'm far ahead. But this is exactly why, because we did these things, and the cross education effect obviously plays a huge role in that.
Now, the cross education effect is it more prominent, you would say? Now, let's say people who are listening and even like general audience could argue that, okay, so that means I should do a lot of isolation work on single side, or I should do a lot of single arm, single leg stuff. Is that true when it comes to regular muscle building, or, being in the most best shape possible? Or is it more for a circumstance where injury happens for you to just get that starting stimulus?
Exactly. The best place to use it is with injured people, because let's say you do biceps curls and triceps and presses on your right side, but you don't train your left side is still going to be lagging compared to your right. It's going to be a little bit better than where it started, but it's going to be lagging. So why would you want to do that?
Sure.
Yeah, but obviously, like, people, when they hear these, I don't want to say tricks or probably methods or new different ideas for training, they always take it to the extreme. They're like, okay, I have to do this exclusively. Like, no, like, this is just a tool in the toolbox. If you're injured, because usually, like we talk about, if you're injured, what you get is resistance band, light dumbbells, and stationary bike and Bosu ball. Like, that's pretty much your rehab. At least with cross education, you have more options. So you return to play in better shape overall. But it's not like if you're healthy, you should do it, because it's not going to maximize your results.
Right. And it's really interesting that you say that, because when I'm going through my therapy right now in my rehab, my physios, I'm at least glad that they don't make me focus just on the injured leg in itself. They will always prioritize doing both the legs, if not doing heavier on the other leg, because with the same concept, like they want one knee to still have its strength and get stronger than it already is, and then the other knee is gonna follow through with that. So that's very like hard to find. And I think that's what we kind of like touched upon early on. And this is something that I would like to, again, pick your brain on, is why is it that physios, even in professional athletes or in your setting that you have seen, what is your understanding of like why they're so delicate, or why they're so like protective when it comes to getting an aggressive rehab getting done, especially for people who've been active or like ready to get back into it?
Okay, I would say there's two main reasons. The first one is you really don't want to be known as a guy who rushed things and F this player up. That's the first one. Nobody wants that on their conscience, because you might be out of a job. Let's be honest.
Sued.
Yeah. So that's the first. So self-preservation, I would say, first thing. Second is just lack of knowledge. And third big one is, do they even lift themselves? Because physical therapists, the only good ones, the few I have ever met, are people who actually lift relatively heavy weights themselves. Because if you don't do that, how can you prescribe it to an athlete or Gen Pop member? Because you don't have a frame of reference how to do it, how to progress the injury, how to instruct it properly. So you're going to play it safe. And this is why it's so important in personal training, or whether you're a strength coach or whatnot. You have to spend tens of thousands of hours under the bar just doing the things that you're going to teach other people, because how are you going to be an effective teacher if you haven't done it yourself?
Sure.
And this is one of those things. A little aside note, like, we see all these people in the fitness industry who are textbook smart, and they can quote all the studies, but they cannot get results when it comes, to actually doing the stuff.
Sure.
And to me, luckily, I have spent enough hours under the bar and training myself, and I have the experience. So there's a lot of things I don't know. I'll be the first one to admit that. But the things that I do know, I speak from experience, and not because I just read a textbook about it.
And I think that speaks more than any book. Like a lot of times the things that are in books and in textbooks come from people's personal experience, things that they've learned about themselves, things that they've developed, and then they put it in a book format. So there's nothing more educational than working on yourself. And of course, finding the point of success in that, and then I guess moving forward and teaching it to others. So that's a very fair point that you brought up, because I've been to multiple PTs over the past 8-9 years. And I think this is the best that I've been to, is because they have their strength and conditioning back down. They're athletes themselves. They lift. They know all the right amounts of where to be. Versus in the past, they would just put like the straps on, bands on, get me to a point where I can, okay, I'm good to go, and then I'm find myself getting injured again. So that's a very interesting point that you bring up. Now, what's one advice that you would give, or one, I would say, suggestion that you would give to a lot of people? Number one, to avoid injuries, like to at least not be in that compromising position of being injured. If it's inevitable, it's inevitable. And number two is that what can they do to come back stronger when, let's say, if they have a bad physio, or let's say not even an access to a physio. I know a few people that who kind of like do their own rehab per se. So what are some advice that you would give when it comes to these two things?
Okay, I'll start with the first one, and then we can continue with the second one. The first one is just technique. Like it always comes down to technique. You're not gonna injure yourself if we're talking weight room stuff specifically, if your technique is good. Like, people have this notion that lifting weights, especially heavy weights, is so dangerous. You're gonna screw yourself, and that's just not true. Like, if you look at the studies on top level powerlifters, it's all in my book, by the way. Powerlifters, bodybuilders, Olympic lifters, the rate of injury is very, very low. First of all, well, what do all these people have in common? If they're competitive at the national or international level, their technique is already good. Okay, but whereas if you look at the regular Joe at the gym benching 225 with horrible technique, like they're gonna injure themselves at some point, and that's why people complain about banged up shoulders or squats where their knees hurt or back hurts from deadlifting. Like let's see how you actually lift before we say that the exercise is bad, because there's no bad exercise. There's just limited mobility, limited range of motion, and how you execute it. And if you execute it badly, any exercise is gonna give you trouble. So that's the first thing. Let's hear the second one again.
Second one was the rehab protocol, right? Like, how can people come back stronger, given that, let's say, their physio is bad, or even if they're or they're doing like self rehab. A lot of people go over the knees over toes guy, if you've heard about him. A lot of people kind of like do his own thing and they're back to normal. So what are some like mistakes or something that people can kind of get smart about and make sure they're doing it right?
Well, one good thing about this internet era is that you get access to knowledge by very good people. And the one guy you mentioned, I've seen some of his stuff, and yeah, it's good. So because I've been fighting in the hockey training world for so long, trying to teach players and athletes and coaches, like, if the knees go forward over the toes in the squat, that's what we want. That's good. There's no reason to shy away from it. Whereas people think, oh, your kneecap's gonna explode and whatever. So that's the first thing. You gotta, if you cannot find the right people, you have to self-educate yourself, even if you're not a professional in this area, because ultimately it's you as the person or athlete or Gen Pop member that you have to live with yourself and your injury and how you rehab it. So it's good that we have YouTube, we have Instagram, we have T-Nation, we have places where we can find quality information. Obviously, the bad side about that is you're not going to be able to just watch some guy's videos, even if it's good information, and you're not going to be able to create a full-on rehab workout plan for yourself and make it work. For that, you would need to actually reach out to them and pay for their time and advice, either through a consultation or if they want to do a custom training program for you. But that's the thing, like, people don't treat their bodies as worthy of investing in, because what's going to happen, you buy that 20K Toyota Corolla or whatever, and it needs yearly checkup, right? And you bring it to the professional, and at the end of it, they're gonna hand you the bill, and you don't argue about the $1,200 you have to pay or whatever for new brakes or whatever. But you do that when somebody says, "Hey, this is my fee for this type of custom program you're asking for," and you're like, "No, I can't afford it." And I'm like, are you stupid or something? Like, your body is not as important as your car. It should be way more important. You should be paying way more money for that. And people don't see the uh, long term like perspective, because yeah, you might be 35 with a bum knee now. Imagine how it's gonna be at 65. Like, you're not gonna be able to walk, and you could have prevented it, but you chose not to because you were broke and you were not willing to invest money in yourself. So then at 65, you have to have knee replacement or surgery or whatever. Like, for example, my mother 2 years ago, she got back surgery. Like, I'm like, what are you doing? Like, I could have rehabbed you for free and gotten rid of that pain, which she was struggling with for years. But obviously, I don't have the aura or as her son,
Yeah.
that she won't listen to me because I'm not an authority figure. This is something a lot of us in the fitness world or as doctors struggle with, because we cannot convince the people around us. We can only convince people who don't know us.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
so that's why also one of the reasons why I really don't I don't train any friends or family, because I know, first of all, they won't pay me what I'm worth, and second of all, they want free stuff all the time, and third of all, they're not going to do what I tell them to do. So it's a waste of time for me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that is very true that you mentioned that. And it's interesting because like a lot of times these are the people that kind of like go to other sources and then they realize, oh, what am I going wrong? But they would never come to the right person or the right person and be like, hey, can you help me? Because that would kind of like maybe like put their self-worth a little bit below and be like, first I didn't believe in you. Now I don't have a choice. So it's very funny that you mentioned that.
Yeah, I mean, but also think about it from their perspective. Like, they changed your diapers, they fed you. Like, you're not the expert to them,
Yeah.
even though you might have the credentials, you might have the track record to back it up, but you're still the guy with the poopy diapers.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing really interesting that you just mentioned is like with the investment that people fail to do is that with a car, for example, right? A car is a yearly investment. With a car, like you got to do it every year, every few months. You got to keep getting done. But with the body, like it's primarily if you do it right, it might be a big amount. It might be like 700, $800,000, whatever, over the few months. But that's really a one-time investment because a right coach would always kind of like, put things into perspective for you that you can take with you for life. I don't think any coach or any personal trainer, unless of course an athlete, incident, whatever, would want someone to stay with them for the entirety of their life. I don't think that serves the purpose of a personal training. So that's like really perspective for people into one because there's a lot of research coming in. Everyone's developing. There's new techniques and new what do you call new studies coming out about like how you can better your body, and that's when the experts come in to help you for that one time, for that one short period of time that's gonna help you for the rest of your life. What are some of your recommendations, Yunus, like when it comes to research or even like studies for rehab or some people that you trust that people can go and be like, okay, you know what? I want to learn from this guy. I want to see what they're doing with injuries, including yourself, of course. What are the other sources as well that you look up to?
Oh, you mean specific persons or?
Like person or like some websites or like some people that you would be like, hey, go check out, like for example, I just said knees over toes guys videos, go check out. So
Rehab is a little bit tricky because that's not really my world.
sure.
My world is more strength and conditioning performance. I will say for that, T Nation is probably the best place to read articles by brilliant coaches. At the same time, I would just have to say, like, do your own research. Like,
Sure.
go to Google, go to Instagram, whose stuff makes sense, who has testimonials, who has a proven track record. Like, don't get mesmerized by gimmicks and all these, like, all the fluff, because there's too much of that. People who are brilliant in what they do, they don't have to try to trick you, because they just show you, like, this is what I do, this is the results I get. If you like it, cool. If not, no worries. Like I said, rehab, not really my key area, so I can't really give you one good guy to follow.
Sure.
If you want sports performance guys, I can give you a bunch.
Yeah, and I think one thing with that is that people can always try to see what is realistic to them and close to their goals when it comes to rehab. You know, if you see some, I would say, I guess from this conversation, that if you see some guy who's telling you to do band work or light dumbbell work for 6 weeks, so I guess run far, far away from those physios and come to close to like people who are like giving you 4 weeks, 6 weeks strength work, getting back to more realistic, realistic goals.
Absolutely. And like we talked about before, look for a physio who actually posts videos of himself lifting relatively heavy weights, because that's a good indicator they practice what they preach. Like, you're not going to get anywhere with the guy who's all about resistance bands. So
Sure.
we want to see the guy who is selling you rehab and getting stronger and returning to play in better shape. We want him to be practicing what he preached. So let's see some squats, let's see some deadlifts, and let's see how well he does them. And another thing I would say regarding rehab is a lot of good performance coaches, they actually have to be relatively good about that as well, because it's just a part of the job. I mean, if you're in the NFL, NHL, whatever, you're gonna have a physio, you're gonna have a strength coach, you're gonna have an athletic trainer, whatever. But if you're a coach at a low level like I was, and running my own off-season training, like I'm the guy who has to handle all that. So I had to learn enough about everything so I could actually produce results for my athletes. So don't put guys into buckets too early, because if you just say, oh, I want to learn from physio specifically, well, if you go to a performance coach who has gotten injured NFL players back to action fast, but he goes by the label strength coach, well, he probably could teach you a lot of stuff about rehab. But
Yeah.
if you just think, no, he's a meathead lifting weights, I don't want to listen to him about rehab, you're going to miss out.
No, absolutely. That's a misconception that people have. They only think one thing is given the title, the so-called title. They think that that's the only thing that the person's expert with. Otherwise, they miss out on so much information that everyone has to offer. Now, Yunus, I know that you have again, you shared your book with me, and if you want to just talk a little bit more about how it covers everything. I know we talked about in the past as well, and also you have a what do you call it, the skinny fat, the program right now. So you want to talk a little bit about that if people are interested to sign up.
All right. So what has happened to me over the last year and a half, I've moved more away from training athletes, professional athletes. I've moved more toward training Gen Pop, which is the reverse of what I did almost 10 years ago when I got into training athletes. So because my background is, I was always athletic. I played soccer, I played floorball, but I was never in great physical shape, in that I didn't have the athletic, muscular, lean body that pretty much we all want as men. So I got into fitness first and foremost to fix myself and to learn about training and nutrition and be strong, be healthy, and most of all, just look good in the mirror, So let's be honest here. And I was able to figure it out after years of trial and error. And now I feel like my passion has moved from training athletes to helping other guys who were in my place reach where I am now, or at least show them how to get there, because there's so much confusing information on Instagram, YouTube, and I don't feel there's enough good information specifically for skinny fat men, because that is an epidemic. Like everywhere I go, even in Egypt, like you see these guys who might look normal in a t-shirt, but when the t-shirt comes off, like you got no muscle mass in the upper body, you got no visible abs, you got wrists like Cheerios. So we got to put some lean mass on you and actually make you look like a man. So that's really where my passion is, and this is where my online coaching program, Ripped in 90, which I launched recently, comes in. I have not seen a training program like that anywhere that specifically targets skinny fat men and helps them add at least 5 pounds of lean mass in 3 months and help you PR on all your lifts. like, because what I notice is a lot of the fitness industry caters toward, you know, guys who want to build muscle, but there's a difference between skinny lean and skinny fat, and you cannot do the same things with skinny fat men as you can do with skinny lean guys.
Yeah.
And mostly it has to do with nutrition. So
awesome. And your Instagram handle is again Yunus Barisik, where people can find you.
YUNUSBARISIK.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much again for coming on and talking about the importance of rehab and injury, especially for someone who's an avid sports person, who likes to play sports. And we'll hope to get you back again.
Happy to do it again.